I've been thinking about this idea that people are lost. You hear it all the time. Someone doesn't know what career they want, or they don't know where they want to live, or they're just not sure what they're doing with their life, and they say, I just feel lost. And I get it. I've felt that way too. But I wonder if lost is always the right word. Because when I think about being lost, there's usually supposed to be somewhere you're trying to get to. You had a destination. You're walking towards it. Then something went wrong and now you don't know where you are. But what if you never picked a destination in the first place? That's a slightly different problem. And honestly, I think a lot of what we call being lost is probably closer to that. You haven't necessarily taken a wrong turn. You just haven't really decided where you're going. Which sounds obvious, but I think it changes the problem quite a bit. Because if you're lost, you need information, you need a map, you need directions. Maybe you need someone who knows that area. But if you haven't chosen anything, I'm not sure more information actually helps that much. And that's where I think we get ourselves into trouble, because there are so many ways now to avoid choosing. You could spend months researching careers, you can take personality tests, you can watch videos from people who are doing the thing that you're thinking about doing. You can make lists of your interests, then another list of your strengths, then another list of things you're good at that you don't actually care about. And all of this can feel like you're making progress, figuring yourself out, you're narrowing things down, but eventually you reach this annoying point where you still have to actually do something. I think that's the part we really don't like, because choosing something means getting rid of the other possibilities. If you decide you're going to be a filmmaker, for the next few years, you're probably also not going to become a doctor. If you move to one city, you're not moving to 5 other cities at the same time. If you spend your evenings writing, you're not spending those same evenings learning guitar, or starting a band, learning Japanese, and becoming really good at making bread. You have to give something up, and I think we're uncomfortable with that, especially now. We're constantly being reminded that there's so many possible lives we could live. You see someone online who quit their job and moved to Italy, someone else started a company at 23, someone else is living in a van and they're rich somehow, good for them. And you look at all of this, and it can create this weird feeling that your life is supposed to contain the best parts of all these possibilities. You should have the interesting career, the creative project, the nice apartment, the travel, the relationships, the friends, the hobbies, and because you can see so many different versions of the good life, it's hard to commit to one. Because what if there's a better one? That's the question underneath a lot of indecision, I think. What if I chose this and later realized I should have chosen something else? And that's a completely reasonable fear. You can make a bad decision. You can spend 5 years doing something you don't like. You can move somewhere and hate it. You can start a business and lose money. You can spend years trying to become a musician and eventually realize you don't have what it takes to make that happen. So I'm not saying you should just randomly pick something and stubbornly stick with it forever. That would be terrible advice. And I do think there's something strange about the expectation that you're supposed to know what you want before you really try things. Because how would you know? Imagine you've never made a film before, but you're trying to figure out whether filmmaking is what you want to do with your life. How exactly are you supposed to answer that? You can imagine it, you can watch films, you can read interviews with directors, you can imagine yourself standing on a set, but none of that is the same as actually doing it. You might discover that you love writing but hate directing, or that you like making short films but don't care about doing it professionally, or that you thought you wanted to make films but you actually just like the idea of being the kind of person that makes them. That's useful information, but you only get it by doing the thing, and I think this applies to almost everything. You can imagine whether or not you'd like living somewhere else, but at some point you're probably going to just have to live somewhere else. Or you could think about starting a business, but eventually you just have to try to start selling something. You can think about wanting to be a writer. Eventually you just have to write something. And then you find out, not necessarily what you're meant to do, just what it actually feels like, which is much more useful because I think we've got the order backwards. When we talk about finding yourself, we usually imagine there's some version of you that's already inside there. Your real interests, your real personality, your real purpose. And your job is to uncover it like you're digging through trash trying to find some gold. I don't think that's how people work. I think a lot of Who you become is the result of what you keep doing. You start making music because you think it's really interesting. Then you get better at it. Then you meet other musicians. Then you start caring about a particular kind of music. Then you start noticing things you didn't notice before. Maybe 5 years later, someone asks, how did you know what you wanted to be a musician? Then maybe 5 years later, someone asks, how did you know you wanted to be a musician? And you give them a story, but I'm not sure you actually knew. You just kept going, and eventually the thing you kept choosing started to look like an identity. That's a pretty different way of thinking about it. You don't always choose something because it perfectly matches who you already are. Sometimes you become the person who likes something because you chose it long enough to develop a relationship with it. And I think that's important because we put a lot of pressure on our first decision. We want the decision to tell us something permanent about ourselves. I chose this, therefore this is who I am. But maybe your choices don't have to be that serious. Maybe you can choose something for a year or 6 months, or even just long enough to figure out whether or not you like it. You don't need to marry every idea you have. You can date an idea, try it, see what happens. The problem is that a lot of people never get to that point because they're waiting for the choice to feel right. And sometimes it won't. Sometimes you're going to choose something while still thinking about another thing. Sometimes you're going to start writing while wondering if you should be making videos. You're going to take the job while wondering if you should have gone to school. I don't think that's necessarily a sign that you made the wrong choice. It might just be what choosing feels like, because every real choice creates a little bit of loss. That's unavoidable. If you choose one relationship, you don't get to find out what every other relationship would have been like. If you choose one city, you don't get to live in every other city in the world. If you spend 10 years becoming really good at one thing, you don't get those 10 years back to become really good at 5 other things. It's a bummer, but that's just life. I also think it's kind of what makes life fun. You can't live every possibility. At some point, one of them has to become real. And I think that's why potential can be a real strange thing. Potential feels amazing because nothing has gone wrong yet. You can imagine being a writer without ever having written a bad book. You can imagine being a musician without practicing the same song for 3 months. You can imagine starting a company without dealing with customers. You can imagine being an artist without making something you're embarrassed to show anyone. The imagined version of yourself is very easy to like. Reality is more annoying, boring. Reality has bad work. Reality has periods where you wonder if you made a mistake. But reality also gives you something that potential can't: feedback. You actually get to find out. And maybe that's what we're missing when we say we're lost. We're waiting for clarity to come first, but clarity might be a consequence of movement. You do something, you learn something, you change your mind, you try something else, you get a little better. You become interested in something you weren't interested in before, and eventually you look around and realize you've been building a life without really noticing. Not because you discovered the perfect answer, you just kept making choices. And obviously, this doesn't mean every decision has to be some huge life commitment. You might just need to choose what you're going to take seriously for a little while. That's it. Pick something. Not because you know it's the answer, because you're curious enough to find out. If you hate it, great. Now you know something. If you love it, great. Now you know something else. If you become obsessed with something completely different halfway through, that's information too. The important thing is that your life starts giving you answers instead of constantly asking yourself questions. Because there is a point where what do I want stops becoming a useful question. You can ask it for years and get nowhere. Maybe a better question is, what am I willing to find out? What are you willing to spend some time doing badly? What are you willing to be a beginner at? What are you curious enough about that you don't need a guarantee? Because you probably aren't going to feel completely ready. You probably aren't going to know that it's the right thing. And you might change your mind, and that's okay. I think changing your mind is underrated. We treat it like evidence that we failed to understand ourselves, but sometimes you only discover that something isn't for you because you're willing to choose it long enough to find that out. That's not failure, that's just information you couldn't have gotten any other way. So if you've been feeling lost lately, I don't know if you need to figure out your entire life. Maybe you're genuinely lost, maybe you need some time, maybe there are things going on that make choosing difficult. But maybe there's also one thing you've been thinking about for a while, something you've kept saying you'd like to try, something you've researched more than you've actually done, something you keep telling yourself you'll get around down to when you're more confident, prepared, less busy, more certain. Maybe you don't need to decide that it's your future. Maybe you don't even need to call it your passion. Just choose it for a little while. Actually give it a chance to become real, because you might not be waiting to find the right path. You might just be waiting for a path to appear before you're willing to walk down it. And maybe that's backwards. Maybe you choose first, then you see. And if you want to do something with this idea, don't make a huge life decision because of a YouTube video. Please don't quit your job tomorrow because of some guy on the internet. Just pick one thing you've been keeping in the maybe someday category and do it this week. Not forever, just enough to get some real information. Because there's a difference between sitting around asking yourself who you're supposed to become and actually giving yourself a chance to find out. Maybe you're not as lost as you think. Maybe you're just standing at that crossroads waiting for one of the roads to tell you it's yours. It probably won't. You might have to just pick one and try it out. Anyway, I'll make more of these if you like them. Subscribe.